The darkest light. When philosophy becomes a death sentence throughout history, certain thinkers have ventured into territories so philosophically treacherous that their ideas consumed them entirely. These intellectual explorers didn't merely study darkness, they became it, lived it, and in some cases, died by it. This raises a haunting question that has plagued philosophers for centuries: can one truly embrace absolute pessimism and still choose to continue breathing? The paradox of living pessimism: imagine believing, with every fiber of your intellectual being, that existence itself is a cosmic mistake. Picture waking up each morning, convinced that non-existence surpasses being in every conceivable way, yet somehow, you continue to exist, to think, to create. This contradiction lies at the heart of philosophical pessimism, a school of thought that argues life is fundamentally negative, where suffering invariably outweighs joy. Most philosophers who embrace such dark worldviews manage to compartmentalize their beliefs from their actions. They write about meaninglessness while finding meaning in their writing. They argue for the futility of existence while passionately defending their arguments. But what happens when someone takes these ideas to their ultimate logical conclusion? Enter Philipp Mainländer, the prophet of nothingness. Born as Philipp Bartz in 1841 Germany, Mainländer represents perhaps the most extreme case study in philosophical consistency, or tragedy, depending on your perspective. Unlike other pessimistic thinkers who lived long lives despite their bleak worldviews, Mainländer's story reads like a cautionary tale about the dangerous power of ideas when taken to their absolute limits. His early life followed a predictable bourgeois trajectory. Born into wealth as the youngest of 6 children, he endured a tyrannical father who forced him into the soul-crushing world of commerce. Banking houses, trading companies, military service, nothing could fill the existential void that seemed to expand within him with each passing year. But then something extraordinary happened. Mainländer discovered Arthur Schopenhauer's The World as Will and Representation, and his entire universe shifted on its axis. The impact was so profound that legend claims he devoured the entire massive text in a single day and night, an intellectual binge that would reshape his destiny. Schopenhauer's dark gift. Schopenhauer, widely considered the father of philosophical pessimism, painted existence as an endless hamster wheel of dissatisfaction. In his view, life operates through what he called the will, a blind, irrational force that drives all beings toward pointless striving. We're all trapped in cycles of wanting, briefly achieving, then wanting again, until death mercifully ends the charade. For most readers, Schopenhauer's philosophy might prompt some dark nights of the soul before returning to normal life. For Mainländer, it became a calling. He saw himself as Schopenhauer's philosophical heir, destined to expand and perfect the master's dark vision. The Philosophy of Redemption. A cosmic horror story. In 1876, at age 34, Mainländer published The Philosophy of Redemption, a work so obscure and unsettling that it only received its first English translation in 2024, nearly 150 years after its original publication. This delay speaks volumes about the work's challenging nature. Mainländer's central insight was both brilliant and terrifying. He agreed with Schopenhauer that existence meant suffering, but he added a crucial twist: this suffering had a purpose. According to Mainländer, the universe began as a single unified entity, God, if you will. Though he considered himself an atheist, this divine unity, in a moment of perfect wisdom, realized that non-existence was preferable to existence. But here's where it gets cosmically disturbing. Since God couldn't simply cease to exist, that would contradict his nature, he chose instead to fragment himself into the universe as we know it. Every star, every planet, every living being represents a piece of God's corpse, slowly decaying toward ultimate nothingness. God has died, Mainländer wrote, and his death was the life of the world. This makes our entire cosmos a massive suicide note, written in matter and energy. The expansion of the universe, the increase of entropy, the inevitable heat death, all of it represents God's elaborate plan to achieve what Mainländer called redemption through complete annihilation. The will to death, where Schopenhauer saw the will to live as the driving force behind existence. Mainländer identified something far more sinister, the will to death, Life itself, he argued, was merely a disguise for the universe's true desire, complete and total self-destruction. The will wants the happy state of peaceful rest, without interruption, until death, he wrote, and in death, it wants total annihilation, the complete and total redemption of itself. This wasn't nihilism for its own sake. In Mainländer's twisted logic, universal suicide represented the ultimate act of compassion. If existence inevitably meant suffering, then the complete elimination of existence would eliminate suffering forever. The final punctuation mark, what makes Mainländer unique in philosophical history, isn't his discovery of some enduring principle, it's what he did after finishing his masterwork. Upon receiving the first printed copies of the Philosophy of Redemption, he stacked them into a makeshift platform, fashioned a noose, and stepped into the void he had spent years philosophically exploring. This act represents either the most intellectually consistent conclusion to a philosophical argument in history, or the most tragic example of ideas consuming their creator. Perhaps both. The paradox of pessimistic creation. Yet here's what makes Mainländer's story even more complex and heartbreaking. Despite his worship of nothingness, his philosophy was remarkably compassionate. Unlike many pessimistic thinkers who retreat into misanthropic isolation, Mainländer held progressive political views. He advocated for social democracy, concerned himself with poverty and inequality, and genuinely cared about reducing suffering for all people. His contemporary Fritz Sommerlad captured this contradiction beautifully. On every page of his work emerges such a gentle, human-friendly image. You can smile so sublimely that it sounds contradictory to his teachings, but it is true. How can someone simultaneously believe in the fundamental negativity of existence while working to improve conditions for others? This paradox reveals something profound about human nature, our ability to hold contradictory beliefs, to find meaning even within meaninglessness, to create even while believing in ultimate destruction. The hereditary shadow. It's worth noting that mental illness likely ran in Mainländer's family. His grandfather had taken his own life, as had his older brother, at a young age. This genetic predisposition to despair may have predisposed him to embrace philosophical pessimism, rather than the other way around. Perhaps his suffering led him to pessimism, not the reverse. Philosophy and poetry may have served as temporary medicine for his anguish, allowing him to survive longer than he might have otherwise. When that intellectual lifeline ran out, when he felt he had nothing more to contribute, the underlying torment reasserted itself. The question of intellectual authenticity. Mainländer's story forces us to confront an uncomfortable question. Is it possible to truly be a philosophical pessimist while continuing to live? Most pessimistic thinkers, from Schopenhauer to Camus to contemporary nihilists, live full lives, despite their bleak worldviews. They compartmentalize their intellectual positions from their lived experience. But does this make them less authentic? Can someone claim to believe that non-existence is preferable to existence, while actively choosing existence every day? Or does the very act of philosophical creation, writing books, developing arguments, engaging with ideas, represent a form of hope that contradicts pure pessimism? The inescapable nature of meaning. Even Mainländer, the supposed champion of meaninglessness, couldn't escape creating meaning through his work. To write a comprehensive philosophical system requires hope, hope that ideas matter, that communication is possible, that someone, somewhere, will understand and be affected by your thoughts. His political activism reveals an even deeper contradiction. Why work to reduce suffering in the world if existence itself is the problem? Why advocate for social justice if the ultimate goal is universal annihilation? The very act of caring about others' welfare suggests that life has value worth protecting and improving. The dangerous beauty of ideas. Mainländer's tragedy illustrates both the power and peril of philosophical thinking. Ideas have consequences. Beliefs shape actions. When we allow our intellectual positions to completely override our biological and emotional instincts for survival and connection, we risk losing ourselves in the labyrinth of our own reasoning. Yet this same intellectual courage that led to his downfall also produced moments of genuine insight. His vision of the universe as God's elaborate suicide attempt, while mythologically rather than scientifically grounded, offers a hauntingly poetic interpretation of cosmic evolution and entropy. His concern for universal suffering, his political progressivism, his tender empathy, all of these emerged from the same philosophical framework that ultimately consumed him: the sword and the shield. In the end, Mainländer wielded philosophy as both sword and shield. It was his weapon against the universe's apparent meaninglessness and his protection against despair, until the protection failed, and only the weapon remained, turned inward. His story serves as a reminder that while philosophy can provide profound insights into existence, it cannot substitute for the full spectrum of human experience. Intellectual positions, no matter how logically consistent, must be balanced with emotional wisdom, social connection, and simple biological drives towards survival and flourishing. Finding light in the darkness. For those of us who resonate with pessimistic insights, who recognize the suffering inherent in existence, the apparent meaninglessness of cosmic processes, the inevitability of death and loss, Mainländer's story offers both warning and inspiration. The warning is clear: don't let ideas, however compelling, completely eclipse the lived experience of being human. The inspiration lies in his unwavering intellectual honesty and his compassionate concern for others, even within his darkest philosophical framework. Perhaps the ultimate lesson is that meaning and hope are indeed inescapable as long as we remain alive. Even in arguing for the superiority of non-existence, we affirm the value of argument itself. Even in worshipping nothingness, we create something. Even in embracing meaninglessness, we forge new forms of meaning. The darkness that consumed Mainländer can teach us to appreciate the light, not by denying the reality of suffering and absurdity, but by finding ways to transmute them into sources of connection, creativity, and compassion. In facing the void honestly, we may discover that the void, in its own strange way, faces back with possibilities we never imagined.